Welcome to this edition of On Point. I'm Kartikeya Sharma and I'm joined by former Law Minister, former Foreign Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid, who has written a book on Ayodhya. Mr. Khurshid, the book Sunrise over Ayodhya, what prompted you to write a book on the judgment, which I would say is one of the most decisions made by the Supreme Court of India in the last perhaps 60 years?
Well, my generation has lived our political life in the shadow, as it were, of Ayodhya. We've been through very, very, very difficult moments, particularly after the Shilanyas, and then after the demolition that happened. And it was a kind of unending tragedy in our political lives. And as a student of law, being associated with the Supreme Court, I thought that it was very important that the judgment itself was made familiar to ordinary people. People were making their own pronouncements and judgments on Ayodhya, on the judgment on Ayodhya. And I thought it was important that they read it and to be made available to them in a convenient manner, and then to provide the necessary commentary that would help them understand and not come to preconceived notions about this had to happen or this has happened for the following reason, etc. That kind of speculation in our country is endless, but it was important. I think this was a critical moment in the life of India. And I think it's important for us to understand, for everybody, for Hindus and Muslims and others alike, to understand what it means and what positive implications it can have for us.
So is this judgment a movement of India's truth and reconciliation, something which happened in South Africa, or the minority community, Muslims they see it in another way?
Well, I have interestingly found people from the majority, my Hindu friends, many of my Hindu friends who've questioned my acceptance of this judgment. And I would imagine that they are my Muslim friends too, who would query my acceptance of this judgment. They are largely silent because somehow they feel that they had publicly made a commitment to accept what the Supreme Court does. And so they can't question it now. But to the extent that I hoped, and I still hope, continue to hope, that this will be a critical moment of closure, reconciliation, coming with truth, is something that I find still not quite there. I hope that in years and months and years to come, this is what will happen. Because for closure, for reconciliation, and for truth, it's not just the adjudicator pronouncements that come from somebody at the top, but the consumers of that judgment, consumers of that adjudication, ordinary people have to accept it. And unless that happens, and I am quite certain it will happen one day, when we will start accepting that history is now history and that there is a shared future and a shared destiny, and let's work towards that. I believe the closure will come.
Why hasn't the closure come? Is it to do with the judgment?
See, the interesting thing is the judgment. What the judgment does, I believe, and some people think that the judgment is flawed, as I said. But I believe that the judgment comes in the context of the Supreme Court having powers to do complete justice between parties that come before it. Complete justice. There's a thin line between law and justice. That you have to do justice in context of the law. But in order to do justice, sometimes you may have to stretch the law. Sometimes you may have to perhaps bypass it or reinterpret it, etc. And that's what the Supreme Court has done. The Supreme Court has been sensitive to the concerns of the Muslims. The fact that they were treated badly, in the manner in which their place of worship was overtaken by people. They were sensitive about this to the extent of saying that to do complete justice, we must give you something. What the Supreme Court gave was not asked by the Muslims. It was a title suit, as the Supreme Court said. So one would win and have the land, one would lose and would not have the land. But the Supreme Court went further and said, you must also get something, because justice requires that you must also have your mosque, and gave land within the municipal limits of Ayodhya, indeed suggested that it might be given out of the 60 acres that were available with government. But the Muslim side was not willing to take it. They said, we will not take charity for a mosque. But the Waqf board fortunately stepped in, and they said, we are happy to have the land. The land was then given to the Waqf board 25 kilometers away, and they've accepted it. So, as we say, Mia Bivi Razi, kya karega Khazi. So if the Waqf board has accepted it and they want to build a splendid mosque there, good for it, good for them. Now, once the mosque is built and once the temple is built, I believe the antagonism should come to an end. The sense of victory or defeat should come to an end. What should be celebrated is the joint existence of Hindus and Muslims helping each other, celebrating each other's success and each other's comfort, and moving forward together. That will be closure.
What explains the silence then?
Yeah. Okay, I see. Unfortunately, it's not just what led up to the dispute being decided by the Supreme Court. It had a unsavory background and a backdrop, and then have come the attitudinal positions of the present government, not just vis-a-vis Ayodhya, but vis-a-vis many other things that relate to Muslims. And therefore, there is a sense amongst Muslims that there is a time to be silent, which may not be necessarily a good thing, but it is good to the extent that there is no provocative reaction, aggressive reaction to what is happening. And I believe that Muslims have to spend some time thinking about their future. If they feel let down by political parties or a political party like mine, they have to think about what alternatives there are available. It's not just a matter of come to us because someone else didn't deliver to you, but a fact of how do we live together? What is the way in which we can live together in dignity, not without dignity? Which way can we live together? At least some of our aspirations being fulfilled and no doors being closed in our face. Now, if this government of the day would take that attitude towards Muslims, irrespective of what's happened in Ayodhya, it would be more acceptable and more feasible to think of a closure. And I believe for closure, a great responsibility rests on the majority population, and a great responsibility rests on this government. So what can we say? We can only hope for the best.
Did you ever imagine that over the course of time, because a lot of things happened from 1992 onwards till the judgment was delivered, of a place of worship to have become a symbol of national integration, a model city, where both sublime, profane, sacred and profane is merging. From being a place of worship, it has been turned into a place of national integration. Did you foresee something like that?
Well, to tell you the truth, I once talked to my friend Ranga Kumaramangalam, who was very closely involved in the process of trying to find a resolution for the government at that time, headed then by Mr. Narasimha Rao. And Ranga, who came of a leftist background, of course, later on ended up with the BJP, and we could never figure out how that happened. But Ranga used to often speak about such possibilities. And I do believe a lot of romantics have continued to talk about this. And at one point of time, I even drew little maps of how it could be done. But frankly, there were no takers. I mean, it had become too much of drawing of battle lines for something like to have happened. It was entirely possible to do something like that, but you required very, very, very strong, powerful, and far-sighted leadership. I mean, frankly, it's happened in Varanasi and it's happened in Mathura. The temple and the mosques back to back. And you can hear the muezzin's prayer, the azan, and you can hear the temple bells just standing across the wall. But then again, what seemed to be a very wonderful solution is today being challenged. It's being questioned. If after Ayodhya, no fresh cases, no fresh disputes were being raised, it would have helped to find Ayodhya as a step towards closure. But unfortunately, that's not what some people are doing, and they want to raise those issues. Let's not forget that the Supreme Court, although it was not required to take a decision on this, did very categorically say that the Places of Worship Act was the right thing to do, and that the Places of Worship Act protects every place of worship in terms of the status quo of 1947, except Ayodhya. And so 5 judges having endorsed the Places of Worship Act means a great deal, although technically someone may argue that this is arbiter because they were not supposed to decide this. And therefore, even 2 judges might tomorrow question this, or perhaps a larger bench from larger than 5 judges might question it. But I wish and hope that that will not be so. Let that be the closure that we were all looking for. And now that Ayodhya is out of the way, there is no prickly thorn that will prevent the acceptance of closure. But it doesn't
Is
suit
it,
some people.
Mr.
And if it
Khushid,
doesn't
sorry,
suit
I'm
some people,
interjecting you. Aren't closures built on compromises?
very good question. Closure is often on compromise. Truthfully, closure often comes when the victor is charitable and is generous and doesn't push the victory in the face of the loser. And I've tried to give some examples in my book on how closures have happened, how people have looked at possible disputes that would not be resolved in any other way. So I guess that's a lesson for us here in India as well. We have tried not to see this as a victory and defeat. We have tried to see this as a win-win situation. I think that's what the Supreme Court tried to do. People accept that or not accept that. I hope genuinely that the manner in which I've tried to project what the Supreme Court has done will bring closure and will bring acceptability. But you're right, there are lots of questions that remain. And I think it takes both sides and it takes 2 hands to clap. I hope that clap does come one day.
But Mr. Khushid, if there is a sense of closure which is to be expected from civil society, then how do you explain NRC, Shaheen Bagh protest, the way the protests were dealt with, the liberal use of National Security Act, suspension of internet? These are basic rights issues, constitutional issues.
Well, absolutely, and I think you put your finger on the very important dimension. I said that Muslims have turned silent as far as Ayodhya is concerned. They've turned silent in many ways on political issues. But there was an interesting outburst of expression and genuinely constitutional expression when the NRC protests and CAA protests happened. Almost an expression of of we are not going to give in to helplessness. There is a country which believes in the constitution, and we can seek our constitutional rights, etc. Unfortunately, it wasn't given a very generous treatment. I mean, you know that, and it got swept away because of the COVID pandemic and an excuse that the government had to use its regulatory powers when the pandemic set in. But I think there are some very positive implications. Some of it went out of hand. I mean, the Northeast riots, we know, went out of hand. Who's responsible for it is an argument that'll go on for some time. But the fact remains that complete and utter silence by a society or section of society is not necessarily good, because it can lead to an explosion. The fact that they came out and expressed themselves, even in a situation of extreme distress, is to be considered a positive indication. But that was where the government could have found closure, by just being a little more understanding and a little more accommodative. The government could have found closure. Unfortunately, the government doesn't seem to know how to reach closure. I mean, they haven't been able to reach closure with the farmers who are protesting. It's been over a year, but they don't know. They don't seem to know how to talk to somebody who disagrees with them, and they don't seem to know how to persuade somebody who disagrees with them to continue to live in disagreement, but to agree to disagree. I mean, that's what democracy is about. But unfortunately, this government may be good at other things, not very good at persuading people to agree to disagree.
Mr. Khurshid, how can you have closure, barring that token one day for Mr. Kalyan Singh, the late Chief Minister? How can you have closure without establishment of criminality, in the sense that, there's a verdict, which has come out, but the criminality in the sense that someone pulled down the structure, the various justices and legal luminaries who were part of the court said that this was criminal, violation of the law. These are not my words. You have quoted them in your book, and then when you don't have the justice in sense of who did it, who organized it, and then you have the decision of the highest court of the land. How do you find a closure there?
Well, I see.
किसी ने तो किया होगा.
In a plural society. No, I understand. I understand the concern that you have expressed. But when you live in a plural society, participation cannot be mathematical. It cannot be based on arithmetic. Participation has to be wholesome. You must never feel that you are excluded from the system. There must be adequate inclusion, but you can't always insist on a mathematical equality. And I think this is the whole idea of a plural society, that you live by give and take. And it is true that the kind of criminal sanctions that should have been imposed were not. But it's not only in Ayodhya that that's happened. It's happened in the Bombay riots. It's happened in the Gujarat riots. And there is a very strong view that, you have to, in a complex society, you have to forgive and forget, and you have to move on. You have to draw some invisible line between things that just cannot be forgiven and just cannot be allowed to be forgotten, and things that can be and must be and ought to be, because you need to go on living together. People throw things at each other when riots happen. Neighbors throw things at each other, but they can't stop being neighbors. And therefore, you have to go back and reconcile. You have to go back and learn to live together. But it should not happen in a manner which is humiliating and insulting. It should happen in a manner in which, with an open heart, you go out and say, I'm sorry. And that's why I think truth and reconciliation is important. The truth is important because unless you accept the truth, reconciliation is impossible, difficult, or hypocritical. So there will be shades of this everywhere, and I'm sure there are shades of it in India. I belong to those, and I hope I'm not in a minority, who believe that you can't go on crying about the past, that you must look at opportunities for the future, and you must learn to forgive, not under pressure, not under fear, not under oppression, but learn to forgive by way of generosity. When you forgive, you help yourself as much as you help the other.
Well, I'm moving on to a different question, but I must put this on record, sir. I differ from you because forgiveness can only happen when there's accountability. Whether punishment comes with accountability or not, a different thing, or justice. I'm falling short of the legal word, but the accountability has to be there. Who did what for the forgiveness to take place? But anyway, moving on, do you feel that your own party gave into this competitive majoritarian impulse on issues like this, 370, Shaheen Bagh, Ayodhya, not to be seen? Let's not go to Shaheen Bagh. Why did we have that act on sedition? It made us look weak. Don't you feel that they came weak on the conviction when it comes to ideas?
Well, it's a very tough. It's a very tough call for us. Let's face it. You can be an idealist. You can be a pragmatist. You can take the middle path. The point is that we are not NGOs. We are political parties on the ground, and principles are very important. Ideology is very important, but there are strategic decisions that you need to take people with you. You shouldn't entirely compromise on ideology, but you should be willing to take some strategic decisions that will allow people to be with you. You can't be living in a laboratory as a political party. You have to live amongst people, and of course, amongst people, your obligation to educate them, to transform them, to make them think in a wholesome manner is something that as a political party you have to do. But we don't live in a perfect world, and you can't, as I said, you can't expect mathematical solutions to everything all the time. And therefore you will have some rough edges that have to be smoothened out periodically. And it takes leadership, and I'm sure that our leaders are conscious of this and will at appropriate stage do what's necessary.
Last question to you, Mr. Khurshid. I'm not arguing for the French hard model of secularism. Obviously, India was secular, that the constitution intended to be the way it was even in 1952, despite the fact that Indira Gandhi got it inserted during emergency. My point is that 2005 Hyderabad Pindri, you would remember when Mr. Gandhi gave his first speech and he said, national flag is my religion, constitutional patriotism. And suddenly you had this shift. It's perfectly fine that if you want to have that little bit of, to use the word Hindu-ness, Indianness, or that subalternness in the way you meet the electorate. But this shifting which has taken place in Congress, one day you were a Tilakdhari, Janudhari Brahmin, you're going to temples every day. And after 2019, it just completely vanishes. There is no grounding on issues which you have raised in your book. Like the reason why I'm asking this as the last question is, you have argued what the judges have said on issues of secularism as part of the basic structure of the constitution, why it is important. The word secular doesn't make a constitution secular. It was secular when the constitution came. It's like a sacred compact. But your party, which is supposed to be the principal opposition party, is weak on this issue. Not shown the conviction.
Well, I do realize you will be asked questions. The terrain today, political terrain today, is very, very, very difficult. You can't stumble over issues that ultimately may not matter and stumble over them simply because people have preconceived notions, propaganda is used against you, etc., etc. I've often said to people, how is it that a major section of Indian voters have thought that the Congress is not kind to them, is not charitable with them, is not faithful to them, and yet you have a ruling party running a campaign against the Congress for appeasement, for leaning over towards the minority for their votes, etc. Now, it can't be that Congress is bad for the minority and Congress is bad for the majority, that Congress appeases the minority and Congress is looking for votes of the majority. Now, some of it may be exaggerated, some of may be faulted, some of it may be unwitting, something may have been done without authority. There are all kinds of things, and I believe, and I can say this without any fear of contradiction, that if you were to have an open chat with our young leaders about secularism and about the rights of minority in this country, you would be astounded by the strength of their feeling. But I know sometimes it probably doesn't translate that well. It doesn't reach out enough. And then there are too many people on the left and the right trying to constantly badger us and say that we are not strong enough. We are not willing to stand up straight and be counted.
But that's like saying, sir, that the centrist space is shrinking. It's like you're saying in a way that the centrist space is shrinking.
No, the secular space is shrinking, and therefore people think that those who are in the secular space will also shrink. But I can assure you, frankly, people like me are in the Congress not just because it's a habit, not just because we were born here, but consciously and categorically because we get the right messages from those who lead us. We have trust and faith that the kind of the values that went into building the idea of India are values that are secure with them, and you will see them come fighting for them at the right time.
Thank you, Mr. Khurshid, for making time for this special edition of On Point. Thank you.